Prosecutors said that Miller killed Lee Holdbrooks and Scott Yancey at one business, then drove to another location and shot Terry Jarvis. That scene and the details leaving people in the area shocked.
Very surprised. You don't expect anything like this normally down here.
Miller was pulled over and arrested later that day. Miller stayed behind bars while the case made its way through the legal system.
The interest of the state was that he not be allowed the opportunity to make a bond.
As the case was presented in the courtroom, testimony indicated that Miller was delusional and believed his coworkers were spreading rumors about him, including that he was gay. A defense psychiatrist hired for the trial found that Miller suffered severe mental illness, according to court documents. But it was said that Miller's condition wasn't bad enough to use as a basis for an insanity defense under state law. Jurors convicted Miller after 20 minutes of deliberation and then recommended a death sentence, which a judge imposed. The death row inmate's execution date is now September 26th.
September 26th, 2024. The clock inside Holman Correctional Facility read 6:16 p.m. when the gas mask sealed over Allan Eugene Miller's face. Seconds later, nitrogen began to flow. What Alabama promised would be a clean, painless death quickly unraveled into something far more disturbing. Miller's body jerked violently against the straps. His chest convulsed. Hands twitched. For 2 full minutes, he writhed, panicked and gasping. Then came 6 more agonizing minutes of desperate breathing. Witnesses watched as his face contorted, his limbs shook, and the room filled with the sound of a man slowly suffocating. This was Alabama's second attempt to kill him. 2 years earlier, they tried and failed, unable to find a vein for lethal injection. But tonight, they were determined to finish what they started. This time, using nitrogen hypoxia, an untested execution method, making Miller only the second person in U.S. history to die this way. His final meal was hamburger steak, a baked potato, and French fries. His final words, "I didn't do anything to be in here." Whether it was denial or madness, the pain on his face told another story. What happened inside that chamber wasn't swift or silent. It was experimental. And it was excruciating. Welcome back to our channel. This is the true story of Eugene Alan Miller, a man failed by the system long before his fingers ever touched a trigger. Like and subscribe to support this work and help us uncover more stories hidden behind court files and prison gates. Meanwhile, just weeks before that brutal August day in 1999, Allan Eugene Miller was a man nearly no one noticed. He didn't speak much at work. He didn't joke around during lunch breaks. He kept to himself, like always. At Ferguson Enterprises in Pelham, Alabama, Allan was the quiet delivery truck driver, reliable but aloof. The kind of man who nodded when spoken to, never raised his voice, and never lingered after clocking out. No one ever imagined what he was carrying inside. Allan was 34 years old in the summer of 1999. He had no criminal record, no violent outbursts. But those close to him, especially his family, knew something was off. He'd always been different. Paranoid, withdrawn, often lost in his own head. His family had a long history of mental illness, but Allan had never gotten real help. Over the years, that paranoia festered into a dangerous delusion. He became convinced his coworkers were whispering behind his back. He thought they were spreading rumors that he was gay, a belief that consumed him. On August 5th, 1999, Allan showed up to work carrying a .40 caliber Glock pistol. That morning, he calmly walked into the building and shot 32-year-old Lee Holdbrooks 6 times. Then he turned the gun on 28-year-old Christopher Yancey, firing 3 fatal rounds. No shouting, no warning, just cold, calculated violence. After that, Allan got in his truck and drove 5 miles to Post Airgas, where he once worked. There, he shot his former supervisor, 39-year-old Terry Jarvis, 5 times. 3 dead men, all executed in under an hour. He fled the scene, the gun still warm. Later that day, police spotted his vehicle and stopped him along a highway. It took 4 officers and 4 sets of handcuffs to subdue him. He was ranting, sweating, but eerily calm. He told officers, "They were talking about me." What he meant by that, no one would understand for years. Years earlier, Allan Eugene Miller was just a boy growing up in a household drenched in chaos. His father was violent, controlling, a man who ruled with his fists and never hesitated to humiliate. Allan's mind fractured early, though no one around him had the tools or compassion to see it. As he aged, the damage deepened. Teachers noted his detachment. Neighbors described him as odd. But in Alabama, mental illness wasn't something you talked about. You just kept it inside until it bled out. By the time he stood trial in Shelby County, Allan was a shell. He had already confessed to the murders. The evidence was overwhelming. But there was more beneath the surface, and it was ignored. A psychiatrist hired by the defense diagnosed Allan with PTSD with dissociative features. According to multiple experts, Allan had experienced a dissociative episode during the killings. He wasn't in full control. He didn't even fully grasp what he'd done. But none of that was presented to the jury. Allan's court-appointed attorney, underpaid and overworked, withdrew the insanity plea before trial. Instead of fighting for his life, the lawyer told the jury, "I'm not proud to be representing someone who did what he did. No defense. No context. Just surrender." The jury took 20 minutes to find him guilty. During sentencing, Allan's lawyer called a psychiatrist, who gave just a few generic sentences and didn't even testify about Allan's trauma or mental illness. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 10 voted for death. 2 voted for life without parole. In almost any other state, that would have spared him. But this was Alabama, the only state at the time that allowed death sentences on non-unanimous verdicts. And so, the judge imposed death. Allan Miller, broken long before the murders, would now be sent to death row. No one mentioned his childhood abuse. No one brought up his delusions or history of mental illness. Justice was swift. But mercy? That never showed up. 2 decades slipped by behind the rusting gates of Holman Correctional Facility. Allan Miller, now in his 50s, spent his days in silence, pacing the small confines of his death row cell. The world outside had changed: smartphones, social media, and streaming news cycles, but inside, time was suspended. What didn't change was Alabama's plan. One day they'd kill him. The only question was how. On September 22, 2022, after more than 20 years on death row, Allan's date with death finally came. The state prepared to execute him by lethal injection. That evening, corrections officers escorted him to the chamber. But what followed wasn't swift justice, it was a disaster. For nearly 3 hours, prison staff tried and failed to insert N4 into Allan's veins. They stuck him again and again, digging into his arms, trying to find a suitable vein. When they couldn't, they hung him upside down on a gurney, hoping gravity might help. His wrists swelled. His body went cold. But no vein could be found. Finally, just minutes before midnight, the legal cutoff, they gave up. Allan Miller, bruised, bloodied, and terrified, was returned to his cell. He had survived his own execution. What should have sparked outrage became just another headline. But Allan filed a federal lawsuit. He argued that he should never be subjected to another attempted execution by lethal injection. The trauma was too great, too cruel. In response, Alabama agreed to change his method of execution. Instead of another needle, they would use nitrogen gas. An untested method. A plastic mask. A silent, suffocating death. No state had ever executed someone with nitrogen hypoxia. Not once. And yet Alabama decided it would pioneer this method on the same man it already failed to kill once. For Allan, the countdown had begun again. But this time, death would come not through painkillers and chemicals, but through air being turned into poison. And once more, no one asked whether the system that broke him was fit to end him. Earlier that day, Allan requested his final meal, a hamburger steak, a baked potato, and French fries. Simple food. Almost childlike. Maybe a small comfort before the state delivered its version of closure. It was the evening of September 26, 2024, and Allan Eugene Miller was no longer pacing a cell. He was strapped to a gurney, arms bound tightly at his sides, a plastic mask sealed over his face. The chamber at Holman Correctional Facility was cold and sterile, but outside, the air in Alabama was thick with silence. People waited, some with grief, others with grim anticipation, to witness a historic execution. It was the second time the state would try to kill Allan Miller. This time, they came armed with nitrogen. The state called it a humane alternative. No needles, no pain, just nitrogen replacing oxygen in the lungs, supposedly causing unconsciousness within seconds. Peaceful, painless. That was the promise. But the reality was something different. Just before the gas was administered, Miller gave his final words. "I didn't do anything to be in here." Whether denial, delusion, or something deeper, those words hung in the air like the gas filling his lungs. At 6:16 p.m., gas began to flow into the mask. Witnesses from the press leaned forward, eyes fixed on Miller's face. What they saw wasn't serenity. It was struggle. His body tensed. His shoulders bucked against the restraints. His head jerked. For 2 minutes, Allan violently shook. Then came the gasping, long, desperate attempts to suck in air that wasn't there. For nearly 6 minutes, he fought. Fought with every breath. Fought even though there was nothing left to fight with. His spiritual advisor, Dr. John Munch, stood only feet away. He later told reporters that Allan's death was more anguish than most. As a physician, he had seen dying men before. But this was different. His face was twisted, he said. He looked like he was suffering. Still, the state declared everything had gone according to plan. 6:38 p.m., Allan Miller was pronounced dead. A man with no prior criminal record. A man with severe mental illness. A man whom even the system admitted had likely suffered a dissociative episode at the time of the murders. This man died choking on nitrogen in front of reporters and prison staff in what officials claimed was peaceful. But there was nothing peaceful about it. And in death, Allan Miller became something else. The 1,600th person executed in America since 1977, and the second human being in modern U.S. history to be killed by nitrogen gas. A number, a case study, an experiment, not justice. Did Alabama carry out justice, or did it make a spectacle? Allan Miller is gone. Executed not once, but twice. First in 2022 when the state failed to kill him, then again in 2024 when they strapped a mask to his face and watched him suffocate. He left behind no apologies, only a final denial. "I didn't do anything to be in here." But what his death truly left behind is a question. When the state kills a man who's mentally ill, whose life unraveled in delusion and silence, do we call that justice? Or just vengeance dressed in protocol? In the end, Alabama didn't just execute Allan Miller. They made him a symbol of a system that's broken, brutal, and unrepentant. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe for more. And never forget, the death penalty doesn't end the pain. It only transfers it.